The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. We're coming to you live from the Warner Center in Woodland Hills, California. This is the home for Autism Live. It is also the home for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. We have the fabulous Traven Hardy who is producing the show for us, and he's going to show you some of the different ways that you can be in contact with us. We are going to be here with you for the next hour. Normally we try to, whenever we can, have Dr. Doreen Grampichet here with us to answer your questions live. She is not here with us this morning. We're going to show you an oldie but a goodie, and that's going to be wonderful. Wait till you see. You're going to thoroughly enjoy this. But I will still be here live and monitoring comments. So if you want to write in, we can be having a conversation live on the side while you watch this recorded segment. I want to particularly point out that you can contact us all the different ways that Traven is showing you there, plus more that are coming. It's a very exciting time. We're very excited that starting, it's this Friday, isn't it? In 2 days, we are going to be coming to you on BronxNet TV. We're very excited about that. So, I want to let you know that we want to hear from you. Write in all the different ways that you can, and we'll be monitoring that for the next hour especially. And we try to monitor it in the off hours too. Quick programming notes for you. Tomorrow, live on the show, Thursday, we have autism expert Amy Sackwriter is going to be here answering your questions. We really love that. And then on Friday, are you ready for this? Everybody buckle up because it's going to get really exciting. We have, for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, we have, for the first time on the show, a guest from Respectability. This is a wonderful organization that looks at the political candidates and rates what their policies are in terms of disabilities. And this election is heating up, right? Unless you're in Iowa, not so much. Let's not even go there, right? But what's interesting that of this ginormous field of people that we have, the vast majority of them have already filed policies on disabilities. So, and I have read all of them. I will notably say one of the big people that people are talking about does not have a policy on disabilities. And as of today, nobody has a policy that is just pure for autism, although I think it's coming. I hear rumblings. I think it's coming. So I can't wait to talk to the gentleman from Respectability and to share some of what I know from the disability policies. I think you'll be very interested in that show. We're going to break it all down and then put it all back together. So that's happening on Friday. But right now, it's time for Ask Dr. Doreen. Check it out.
Dr. Doreen Grampichet is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Grampichet.
Dr. Grampichet.
Dr. Doreen Grampichet.
Dr. Doreen Grampichet is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Dr. Doreen Grampichet. I'm always thrilled to be able to say that to you because she is truly an expert in the field of autism. I believe the preeminent expert in the field of autism. And
thank you, Shannon. Good morning.
Good morning. It's always so great to see you.
Thank you so much.
And we're thrilled to have her with us. She's been working in the field of autism for well more than 30 years. And amazing because she's worked with small babies up through senior citizens, everything in between, and not just autism, but the field of related disorders. She is the reason why the Center for Autism and Related Disorders exists. She is the reason why my child got the help and support that he needed, because she trained a group of people, and so many people out there get the benefit of what she's been able to do. But on top of that, she's a visionary who helps us to prepare and helps the medical field and insurance to prepare for what's coming could we use her more than now? It's a great time to have her here. But she's going to be answering your questions for the next hour. And we like to remind everybody, though, at the start of the show that there is no expert in any field who could give individual specific advice in this format. So you can write in questions, be as specific as possible. And she's going to give you information around that, but it can't be individual specific. That would be a disservice to the individual.
Right, absolutely.
All right.
Well said.
Good. All right, so I want to get started with a question that we had that came in, if my iPad doesn't fail me now, that came in at the end of last week from a viewer that we've had who's been watching the show for quite a while. She says, I'm a 23-year-old woman with Asperger's syndrome. I also have a rare genetic condition that occurs only in females called Turner syndrome, which causes short stature. I'm 4'10". It's February, which is also Turner Syndrome Awareness Month. Only 2% of the fetuses with Turner syndrome make it to birth, so I am truly a miracle. I'm so grateful that I'm here. God definitely has a plan for my life. Some Turner syndrome girls also have some form of nonverbal learning disorder. I have met some girls with Turner syndrome that also have some form of autism. So there must be some relation between Turner syndrome and autism. And she wants to know, what's the difference between autism and a nonverbal learning disorder, or are they similar? What a great question.
Great question. So Turner syndrome, for those who don't know, is a lack of one X chromosome, and females have two X chromosomes. So basically that's what it is. I don't think there's much research on all the different things that it affects in terms of development, but let's put that aside, and good for you for overcoming everything that is difficult, that makes processing life a little bit more difficult. So NLD, nonverbal learning disorder, is a term we use. It's not really a diagnostic term.
Okay.
It's just a name we use. And essentially what it is trying to describe, it's sort of a difficult, if you think about what it actually says. It says nonverbal learning disorder. What that means is a person with NLD would have a hard time understanding things that are nonverbal, that are subtle. So, for instance, inferences, reading other people's perceptions, or excuse me, understanding how people feel just by looking at their facial expression, or like understanding, subtle social things. And that's basically referred to as NLD. It is pretty much the same as Asperger's, if you think about it, because individuals with Asperger's have a hard time with dealing with things like, social nuances, abstract social nuances. Now, autism is more pervasive than that. Autism involves a difficulty with understanding basic speech and language. I mean, autism itself is much more pervasive than Asperger's or NLD, because really autism affects all different areas. Like, it will affect our ability to communicate. It does affect your ability to attend to anything, because you're kind of isolated in your own world. Individuals with autism tend to have many more difficulties, let's say. So symptoms, so for instance, they often have what we call self-stimulatory behavior, or repetitive, stereotypical behaviors that are things like lining objects up, repetitively doing a behavior, like turning the lights on and off, or even as severe as things like body rocking or hand flapping. All of those types of things fall under self-stimulatory behaviors, which are not often seen at all with individuals who have Asperger's or NLD. So that's kind of one big difference. Another one is just the level of speech, communication, language. So usually with individuals who have a diagnosis of autism, you're looking at a much more, I guess, advanced delay in speech and language. So I mean, I have individuals who are nonverbal, and we will teach them how to communicate with a iPad, for instance, or an Oldie device. Whereas on the NLD side, you're looking at people who generally have an average speech. They might have a little bit of difficulty understanding pragmatic speech, which is social language.
Okay.
So those are things like, for instance, if I say to you, yeah, I feel just great. You know, there's a certain irony in in the tone of my voice. Sarcasm is one example. Or if I say something like, well, clearly she wasn't feeling well, and you know, the inferences that are nuances that are in social language.
Yes.
Those types of things are a little bit hard for people with NLD to understand. But they understand language, they understand speech, they can communicate everything else. And so, you know, that is a huge difference, because autism is seriously affected by a deficit in speech and language.
So I have a couple of questions
Sure,
here, because
sure.
it's always very confusing to me. Whenever I would hear about someone who's nonverbal, I would always think, oh, that's somebody who doesn't speak, right? And then, but what I've learned over the last couple of years is it's more complex than that. Is it correct that the actual term nonverbal means that you have no means of communication, which isn't just speech. So you're not pointing, you're not uttering, so that once somebody, I've been told, and the community doesn't go by this, and maybe it's wrong, but somebody had said to me that if you're going by the actual definition of nonverbal, then there's no communication. That communication is more than just speech. Verbal communication is more than just speech. So that once a child technically, or a person, is able to use PECs or something like that, that they're non-speaking, they're non-vocal, but it is still verbal communication when they're trading something for something or pointing to it.
Right.
Is that accurate, or is that just semantics?
No, it's a semantic type of issue that we have in behavior analysis, but let me just maybe try to separate a few things out here.
Okay.
So when we talk about nonverbal, and let's just first make a clear statement that nonverbal is a description. It has nothing to do with nonverbal learning disorder.
Okay.
Zero.
And that's the other thing I was going to ask about.
So
is
that
this is
nonverbal learning disorder, that's why I said
entirely different.
Completely different.
Got it.
Nonverbal learning disorder is talking about people who are verbal, who have a very hard time understanding nonverbal nuances.
Got it.
Okay, it's a completely different.
So that's important. Okay,
very
got it.
separate. Now, individuals who are nonverbal, in behavior analysis, we can separate them. We can say someone is nonverbal or nonvocal.
Okay.
Okay, so nonvocal means that they basically are not expressing themselves vocally.
Okay.
Nonverbal means that they also sort of don't understand any verbalization at all, whether it's receptive or expressive.
Okay.
And it doesn't, so in other words, a person could be, let's say, non-verbal, but could be completely communicating on an Oldie device.
Right.
Okay? So, you know, because they are communicating, they're not using their sound.
Right.
But they are still communicating. So, but nevertheless, this question, I think, has to do with the very higher level individual.
Yeah.
And this is someone who's barely even on the spectrum. The only commonality they have with this spectrum is the inability to understand those very subtle social nuances that we're referring to. Now, there's many of these are nonverbal. For instance, with the verbal aspect of what I'm saying is one thing, but the satire in it is nonverbal.
Right.
It's intended.
Right.
It's an inference. Or let's say if I talk to you and I don't look at you, that's a nonverbal thing, eye contact.
All those cues, those social cues that come, that are sometimes it's in the speech, but a lot of times it's in the body language.
It is most of the time in the body language and how we approach things. Like if I suddenly was to sit forward and start, you'd get an impression of either she's angry or she has something very important to say.
Yes.
All that. Those are the nonverbal cues.
Got it.
That an individual with NLD won't pick up on.
Okay, fascinating.
So, and when they don't pick up on it, they also won't display it in their own behavior. So, in other words, it's like sometimes you'll see someone with NLD standing real close to you.
Yes.
They don't understand that they're within the bounds of your territory, your personal space. They just don't get that because they don't have that feeling themselves. Those are the differences.
And so, would it be safe to say that if we were thinking of this as the old time circle sets, that for people who have Asperger's, it seems like a lot of them
have an LD.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So the way that I look at it is like autism, right?
Yes.
And then what we used to have pervasive developmental disorder, autism in itself is just very different, broad. Then you have like individuals with Asperger's who they're not really, you can't put, in my mind, Asperger's doesn't exist anymore, by the way. It's a subtype of autism now, but I don't even think it should be. I don't think it's the same type of issue. Individuals with Asperger's do, however, in my mind, have a few more issues with language than people with NLD. NLD, we're talking about individuals who have usually very advanced language, actually. Their language is very sophisticated and they can write creatively and they can do all these sorts of things, but their reasoning skills are sometimes affected. It's just because they can't read these social cues. Here's the traditional test for NLD, by the way.
Okay.
The test started out at Yale Child Study Center, and it's a very cool little cartoon. You know how we have for Theory of Mind Deficit, we have the Sally Ann cartoon?
Yeah.
Which individuals with NLD might have a hard time with as well, by the way. But this cartoon it's three shapes. It's a circle and a square and a triangle, and that's all they are. They're just shapes, right? And they're moving around each other in a way that if you look at it, if I look at it, Shannon, I can immediately tell that the circle and square are friends, because they're playing together, and then the triangle keeps trying to play with them but doesn't, and then the triangle becomes depressed, and then like attempts a few times but then becomes sad, and then eventually I don't remember, the circle or the square go over and like bring the triangle, and then the triangle joins them. Okay, so you and I can easily tell that by the way the shapes move.
Right.
An individual with NLD won't.
Okay.
They can't read things like friendship, sadness, all this sort of stuff, which is from three nonverbal objects that are just shapes. They can't figure that out. And that's a very subtle thing.
Yes.
So now we talk about basic things like facial expression. A shape doesn't even have facial expression. Right. But there's much more that we as humans read from each other. It's facial expression, it's eye contact, it's tone of voice, it's how we move in relation to each other, it's a million things. And those are the things that NLD people have a hard time with.
This is fascinating for me because I don't think I ever had, I think I had heard this term before, but I don't think I understood in any way, shape, or form what it meant. And you know that people who are familiar with the autism community often speculate. They meet people. I have said before that I meet everyone, and I think that we're all a little bit on the spectrum. We have different symptoms, and so I wait till people reveal to me where on the spectrum are they, because I just assume that we all have our things, right? But there are discussions that people have where they'll look at somebody and they'll go, I've always wondered if this person. But I certainly have met people in my life that I've said, okay, I don't think that they don't qualify for a diagnosis of Asperger's or autism or whatever, but you definitely see that there is a deficit in their ability to read what's happening.
Okay. Yeah,
and I have friends who are like, oh, come on, you don't think that that's Asperger's? And I'm like, no, it's not Asperger's because it's not this and it's not that and da-da-da-da.
Right.
But maybe it's this.
So that's really interesting because see, I always look at because I'm a psychologist first, right?
Yes.
So
you're qualified to diagnose.
Well,
the rest of us are just speculating.
No, it's just because you spend a lot of time learning how to diagnose, right?
Yeah.
And the diagnosis depends on, as best as we can, identifying a number of symptoms that all cluster together. So for example, and I always use this example because it's kind of an interesting one to me. For something to even have a name, or in the book, right? NLD
Yes.
doesn't. Let's start there.
Okay.
NLD is not a diagnosis.
Okay.
NLD is a term that people have come to use.
Okay.
Okay, so I could say I have NLD just as much as I could say I have humor.
Okay.
It's just something we have or don't. Now, with the things that are in the book, in the diagnostic manual, they are very specifically based on a number of symptoms in each area being there. So like when I talk about alcohol dependence or alcohol abuse, or that was the area I found very interesting, because for two things about it. One is, first of all, you have to have the specific number of symptoms. Why is that? Because unless you have the specific number of symptoms required for each disorder, you're still functional. And nothing is classified as a disorder unless it makes you not functional at work or at home. And that's a very specific thing. It's not, so very, very clear, like for kids, because they don't go to work, it's at school or at home.
Right.
So in other words, with autism, right, you have a series of symptoms, and if these symptoms are even the lowest level, a 1-1, right, they're still present,
Right.
and they contribute to you having a hard time in school or at home.
Right.
Okay, so now Asperger's has fewer symptoms and different symptoms than autism. Individuals with Asperger's often don't have a language delay. So, but it's still a form. It's still there because the belief is that it does make life a lot more difficult for them.
Certainly.
Now, NLD individuals, probably it makes life difficult for them too. But then there's so many other, as you said, Shannon, I agree. I think we all, let's say autism, mainly consists of these repetitive behaviors we have, which I think are mainly have to do with pain or anxiety.
Right.
So
I agree.
So we have pain or anxiety, then we have the communication issues, which I think have more to do with sensory than anything else, right?
Okay.
And then we have all the kind of advanced things that get delayed because of those two things, right? Now, you can have any combination of these things, and there's not a name for every combination. There just isn't, right? That's why we call it a spectrum. There's not a name for someone who has, a very mild social-ish deficit, like mild on the social communication and severe. There's 9 combinations of autism spectrum disorder.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
there's 3 levels of severity, and they can be applied to these 3, actually 2 areas, so 3 to 6 different types.
Right.
Actually, no, it does still add up to 8 or 9 because
Yeah.
you can have different combinations. So there's a lot of different, none of them have a name.
Right.
But an individual who's very, very delayed in language is going to be very, very different from an individual who's very, very delayed in social.
Yeah.
They're just different. They're extremely different. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's the thing. To get back to this, NLD only means you have an issue with those nonverbal cues
Got it.
of the environment.
And
That's
you
what
might
that
still
means.
be like incredibly functional, but you have difficulties with these things.
Oh, thanks for saying that. Okay, now what I think is, and I see this in our kids and in our recovered adults and in a lot of adults that we teach, and in your son as well, they overcome these things because they think about it and they practice and they realize what it is. And so, like, instead of being someone who used to have a hard time with that, they become even better at that because they see it. They like train themselves to, none of us walk around thinking about it. It's funny because, like, okay, so you know how we say girls generally have better intuition, right, than boys? Okay, I don't know why that is. It's probably true, but boys also just don't mind being clueless. Like, it's just part of their persona, right? They're not supposed to read a lot of emotion into everything and try to figure out how people, why don't you just tell me how you feel, right?
Right.
It's a very typical statement from a male, not a very typical statement from a female.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But I think with our kids, what happens is they are that person to begin with, where they can't read it, but then we teach them to pay attention. Like, look at how her face was. Did you see? Was that a sad face or how?
Yeah.
So they get so good at it, and I think that's where Jem is. Jem sometimes points out stuff to you that you didn't notice.
Yeah.
That's because he's become like a little psychologist. He's become like he analyzes things.
Yeah.
I see that in a lot of our kids, that they get to a point where their analysis of others is better than the general population.
And for anybody who feels like, oh, well, that's putting something on them, it's giving them a toolkit. They have the opportunity to use it or not use it. And I see that for my son, when he uses the toolkit, he will say to me things like, if he sees me starting to escalate,
what's up with you?
and he'll say to me, I think you need to stop. I think you need to drink something. I think you need to sit down and think about it, because this is not the end of the world, Mom.
What a fantastic
talks me off a ledge.
I mean, what an amazing
yeah,
thing,
it really
right?
is. I always say to him, you are going to make somebody a wonderful boyfriend.
Exactly. And you know what? I feel, all the people at CARD tell me that I use a lot of psychology in my practice in just running the business. And it's true, when you know those things, there's no question you're going to look at someone who's talking to you and understand immediately, oh, this person has a lot of anxiety. What they're saying is probably not exactly what they intend.
Right.
It influences you.
Yes.
So,
but I will say this, that I have seen you use your talents on me and other people, and you do it in such a way that it is not like we don't even notice until afterwards.
There and say,
yeah, you don't give us the technical terms.
Yeah.
I think what you're suffering from right now is anxiety, Shannon.
Right.
No, you deal with it in a really subtle way that's really clever.
But just going back to this question, I guess the summary of all that is that if you do have an NLD, or if you feel you have NLD, then you definitely can overcome NLD in a lot of different ways, and it is not something that should hold you back at all in any way. And in fact, there's more and more of it these days.
Yeah, there's information available to you about how to overcome these things, and there's more and more ways that you can get services to have a class or one-on-one support to be able to learn. It's just it's just stuff that needs to be learned. It's not physics, and it's not something where you have to knit something and create something from nothing. It exists already, and then you can know the finer points.
Exactly.
It's pretty fascinating. All right, we should take a break, and then when we come back, we're going to do a follow-up on a question that we had last week, and then we're going to start to get into some of the new questions. So stick with us.
Nobody ever asks a kid with autism, what is it you'd really like to do? At this school, we ask the kids, what is your goal? What is your dream? Exceptional Minds is a vocational training program for young adults on the autism spectrum who want to have careers in computer animation and visual effects. I think young people with autism are totally underestimated.
When you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. They all have different talents, different skills, and what surprised me is that there really are no limits, that if these guys believe that they can do something, they really can.
It's estimated that 90 to 95% of young adults with autism are unemployed or underemployed.
A lot of young adults still live at home. A lot of them suffer from depression and are very isolated from the rest of the world, and the opportunities for them are very limited.
We want to develop careers for our young adults. Our full-time program runs 3 years, at the end of which we have job placement and job coaching. We have a work readiness program. We also have our own in-house studio so that when our students graduate, they can do on-the-job training and work on real projects.
We outsourced about 30-40 shots to the team here. They did fantastic work that we can put into a movie and be proud of it. It's great. I mean, we want to do it again.
The studio is their first step into the professional world, the first step in their new careers as digital artists.
The whole purpose is to get the students out into the real world.
We all have the same dreams. We want significance, dignity, and purpose with our lives. We have an opportunity to give those 3 words to every single student at this school who will actually be able to go out and participate in the dream.
This is my first full-time, full-paying job. I primarily work in After Effects. I learned After Effects at Exceptional Minds. It seemed like a good place for me to fit in because I was interested in animation.
Right from the first day that Nicky set foot in our company, he was producing work for us. We saw what level of professionalism is being instilled in them from the very beginning.
This was the first opportunity where Nicky could combine something he loved to do with something he was really, really good at that could eventually lead to employment.
When we first met Kevin, he was working at a supermarket bagging groceries, and they said he would never amount to anything else.
I work at Stargate Studios, and I'm a junior compositor. I mainly do like rotoscoping right now, and I'm still learning.
I think that you find great talent in the most amazing places. The students at Exceptional Minds have had a fair amount of training to get them ready for the visual effects environment.
If it wasn't for Exceptional Minds, I might still be at the supermarket, and I might be living at my parents' house.
Everything's changed. Nicky has purpose.
It feels like I'm a member of society now.
He's capable of making it on his own.
Once you get inside and you see what's really happening there, you immediately want to be a part of it.
It's the dream factory, you know, the movie business, and if you can connect people with their dreams, then the magic happens.
At Exceptional Minds, we like to say that we are changing lives one frame at a time.
Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. I want to go to a follow-up for a question that we had last week. We had a mom who had written in about looking advice for her son's anxiety surrounding sleeping and thinking that he disappears when he goes to sleep. She said, I really appreciate you and Doreen taking the time to answer my question on air, especially with me being halfway around the world. The fun thing about the internet is that you're exactly the same distance as anybody else.
Exactly.
Which makes
That's
it really
a nice
cool.
way to say it.
So she says, my son just turned 12 years old and has a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and learning difficulties. He's very verbal and he's always very interested in the world around him. However, I feel even though he is 12 years old, his real maturity is that of a 7 or 8-year-old. He takes medications for his ADHD, and I'm so bad at names of medications, but Equisim, she lists the amount. He also takes out 8 milligrams of melatonin in the evening, along with 2 milligrams of
guanfacine.
Okay.
And tuna.
I'm going to take your word for that. She says he doesn't suffer from seizures or sleep apnea. At home, there is myself, my husband, and son. We have only the one child. Myself and my husband take turns to lie beside him on his bed at night to offer comfort when going to sleep. But he does wake during the night and shouts out for one of us to come back in and lie in his room again. I feel the fact that we leave the room during the night might be making his anxiety worse. The idea from Dr. Doreen on him wearing a band all night is brilliant, and I will definitely, I love it when people recognize your brilliance, because I always say that you're brilliant. And she says, I will definitely be trying it. Would it be better to focus on reducing his anxiety surrounding sleep and then begin withdrawing from his room? And she says, I really appreciate any advice you could give, because we know, and you say this all the time, when one of our kids isn't sleeping, no one is sleeping, and then everybody's ability to cope goes right out the window. I know this firsthand. I air hug, feel for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think 2 nights ago, I didn't sleep at all, and I was just really exhausted because I don't know, we just had our first retreat for supervisors, so I didn't have a weekend, so I was just really tired, and then like not having a night's sleep, and I was a wreck.
Yeah.
You just sleep is the most important thing. So So first of all, and you saw my response to this, right? Because I
Yes.
couldn't wait. It was late at night, I think, and I
Yes.
was like, I need to get this info to this parent right away, because I was like, so I emailed you about it, but
I have not shared that with her
okay,
yet.
great. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So this is Equisim XL is ADHD medication. It is pretty strong. He is on the maximum dose of this, 60 milligrams. He's 12. I don't know how big he is. I assume he is adult size. That is most likely what's causing him anxiety. It's very strange. Sometimes we have ADHD medications are basically stimulating. They're extremely stimulating. They're, amphetamines.
Yeah.
And so that is what is causing him. That could be what is causing him anxiety. What I would do, and yes, it is better to focus on reducing his anxiety before withdrawing from his room, but that means you need to start reducing his medication. I would very seriously recommend that you look into doing that, and that you talk to his physician. This is XL, so this is extra long. So that means it's lasting all day long. You have several options. Either you could go to a lower dose, or you could get him off XL, which means it will wear off by the time he's sleeping. I would track whatever it is that you think this medication is doing for him right now. So let's say it's supposed to let him focus, right? Measure that somehow. In other words, give him an activity that requires heavy focus, attention. Get a baseline. So like, let's say a timed activity, such as, doing a basic crossword puzzle, or doing a basic worksheet that has questions on it that are appropriate for him, and time it, and then measure like exactly how many he can respond to now, and do that for like 2 days, and do it a few different activities, and get a baseline. It doesn't really matter. The point is not for him to get 100% on this. It's just get his baseline, get his current functioning, and write it down. And then talk to his doctor and get him on a lower dose, or get him off the XL. And probably a lot of people prefer the XL because there's no, like, with ADHD meds, you have like a sudden drop when the medication wears off. So you keep him on the XL, but I would reduce the dosage. I think the next dose is 30 or 40, could be. There's 30 and 20 and 10, I think. Reduce the dosage, and then give him those tests again and see if he actually changed.
Okay.
Because that's really important. And if he did change, if you saw, and wait, because once you get him off the dosage, reduce the dosage, just, retest him a week later. Give him a little bit of time for his body to adjust to the new dose, and then test him. I don't think you'll even see a change in his attention, and I think he'll feel a lot better. Take one of these yourself. I always do that. I always like to test on the kids. It raises your heart pressure. It's just, you feel like your heart is beating. Now, it's funny with anxiety, it's like a lot of actually other things. This is an interesting experiment. Like, anyone who is really kind of sad, okay, just pick yourself up and sit upright, and like really pay attention, like sit upright, and you'll immediately notice that your tiredness or depression or whatever will decrease a little bit. It's the same thing with anxiety. If you feel your heart rate, you start to feel anxious, because you're like, what is that? Like, because that feeling of your heart racing has been associated with other times when you had anxiety. It's the fear response, or fight or flight response, your heart rate goes up. So if with these medications, our pulse is usually faster, our heart rate's stronger, you feel it, and it's speed. So you're kind of like a little bit agitated. And that, most of the time, in fact, anxiety, depression, or anxiety is one of the side effects of this medication.
Okay. And sometimes
and also
we don't know
things
that.
like headache or like nausea, all these types of things come with these medications. You have to watch out for them.
And so good for her to be able to know that. And I just want to piggyback on what you were saying about, put your body in the shape of. That's literally the phrase that we use. Because my master's degree is in theater. I used to teach college theater.
There you go.
And we would teach, young freshmen would come in always and go, how do you do the thing where you just make yourself cry on cue on stage? And like it's some big fascinating mystery kind of thing. And what we would do, and it's a little bit more complicated than this, but what we would say to them is you put your body in the shape that your body is in when you cry.
Right.
If you put your body in the shape of how you cry, it sets you up and then you can start to cry.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, on our Thursdays when we do our mindfulness moment, we covered on the study on the show the study that they've done recently about taking 2 minutes during your day and putting yourself in a superhero pose. So you stand with your hands on your hips and your feet apart and your chin up like you're Superman, and you do that for 2 minutes.
That's
and that your
right.
performance throughout the day, there are 3 different poses that you can do, but I like that one. I do it in the
That's
elevator here
interesting.
sometimes. Your performance on things gets better as a result. Surgeons are doing this now before surgeries.
Really?
Yes,
That is
because
fascinating.
they have shown that it absolutely makes you perform better. 2 minutes.
That's amazing.
So putting your body in the shape of whatever, I just had to piggyback on that. But great information to know, because it's so frustrating as a parent that you go to the doctor and you get those limited times with the doctor and they go, take this medication. You look up what symptoms are, but to know that that particular medicine is likely going to cause anxiety in your child.
Right.
When
And a lot of
anxiety
times-
is the thing you're fighting.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And a lot of times we have anxiety associated with ADHD just because all the meds are causing it. So you just need to really look at that. And please write in again, because I'd really like to see if that starts to help the reduction of anxiety, at which point you need to start fading yourself out.
Okay. We got lots of questions coming in from lots of different people. Somebody wrote in and said, first of all, one of our moms in India wrote in and said, if you change the time of when Dr. Doreen is happening, we are on a time change right here because of daylight savings time, but we still have just over 15 minutes left, because she said, let me know how much time there is left. Just over 15 minutes left of Ask Dr. Doreen. Stella wrote in and said, I've been researching but cannot find the square, the circle, and the triangle. Do you know what it would be called? Do you know what she should search for?
Search for nonverbal learning disorder shapes.
Okay, and we'll try to find it too. And if we find it, we'll post it on our Facebook later on today. And in just a second, we had somebody...
I think the person who designed it last name is Sparrow, Sparrow, I think.
Okay.
I'm just going by memory.
But we'll
now.
try to find it too, and if we find it, we'll post it on Facebook. And now I'm going to open a whole can of worms, because we had somebody who wrote in and said, you cannot recover from autism. Yes, progression in areas of development, but to completely recover is false. So we're going to address that, because I can't not, right? And I so appreciate you writing in, because these are exactly the kinds of things where we tend to sometimes butt heads. And I think if you'll stick around, we're going to go to a commercial. I think if you'll stick around, you'll be warm to the place we're coming from. I'm going to optimistically promise it, and then you can come back at me and say it's my fault later. So don't go away. But first, we have Christina Adams is watching, and
great.
so we want to say hi to Christina and all the other people that are watching.
Christina.
And we are going to show the first segment of Autism and Beyond with Christina Adams. So take a look.
Can you have a life with autism? Absolutely not. Give it up right now. No, that's not true. I'm here to tell you, you can have a life with autism. I have a life with autism, and it's a good one. When you start on this journey, you don't know what's going to happen. You really have no idea. You're kind of in shell shock for the first couple years. It could be as long as 5 years. until you realize I do matter to people. When my son was first diagnosed, I remember thinking I would go anywhere and do anything for him. I didn't even think about it. I just came way at the bottom of the list. However, after a few years passed, I realized if I'm not important anymore, then that means no one's going to be here for him. So how do you have this life with autism? It's not easy. It's never going to be easy, but it can be done. It's really all about support. And support is a word you're going to hear a lot when you deal with the autism power structure. And that means schools, government agencies, social service agencies that can help you. There are things out there that you don't even know exist. So once you start connecting with other parents, you're going to kind of find this treasure chest full of things that only they can help you unlock. But once you get that support, it could be a babysitter coming to your home. It could be a therapist to take your child out and get him into the community. You can either leave the house, do your shopping, go to a farmer's market, do whatever you want to do. And it doesn't matter if it's really only about 5% of your time. As long as it's dedicated to you, that's going to help. It's all about your willingness to find support and your willingness to accept change and your willingness to kind of stick up for yourself, because you're battling for your child and you have to realize you guys are connected. There's a bond between you and your child that can never be broken. And if you're doing well, then your child's going to do well. So finding what you need to be happy, whole, and healthy as a person is a way that you can have a life with autism. And that's important too, because if you have a life with autism, you can also give your child a life too.
Welcome back, and we're so excited. This is a new series that we have with Christina Adams, and we're going to be debuting more of them in the coming weeks. So exciting to have her contributing her wealth of knowledge here on the show, and we want to send a big, warm thank you to her for taking the time. We got to go and spend a lovely day with her.
That's awesome.
At the beach and at her home.
Christina.
She's
great.
amazing. And anybody who hasn't read her book, A Real Boy, you're missing it. That's all I can tell you. You must read it.
Absolutely.
She's a lovely writer, and it's a beautiful story of a mom and her son going through a CARD program. It was my Bible in the 6 months before we started at CARD. It really...
and it's also so much more. It's like the experience of autism and so on. It's a great book.
It gave me permission to feel all the things that I was feeling and to move through it and keep going.
Right.
Which was huge, because if you don't know, you don't know.
I remember when it first came out, I gave my mom two books to read. One was this, and one was Let Me Hear Your Voice, which is another classic.
Yes.
And she loved this over that.
Well, of course. I remember saying, see, I just got chills because I remember saying to my mother when I told her that Jem had autism, and she was like, oh no, and she was crying on the phone, and she said, oh no, not our baby. And I remember at that point I said to her, I said, he's exactly who he was yesterday. We just know more about what we're going to do to help him. And then shortly after that, after I'd read A Real Boy, I said, I'm sending you this book. I want you to read it. This is what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get on board because this is exciting.
Oh, wow.
And
Good for you.
And so she read it and was like, okay then, it had taken her a little while, but she got on board. So great book. And we thank Christina for all of her wisdom. Okay, so before we went to break, I mentioned that we had somebody who wrote in on Facebook who said you cannot recover from autism. Yes, progression in areas of development, but to completely recover is false. And this is, you're not alone in feeling that. And I've talked before on the show that I have individuals, good friends who are on the autism spectrum who tell me they don't like the word recovery. Mm-hmm. I've pulled back from using the word as often as I do, but I don't pull back from talking about what it is that we're talking about when we say recovery, because that's real. So
absolutely.
Tell us
I'm never going to pull back because it's so important to so many people what they have accomplished, and I don't want to detract from that. So I'll respond to this, but I also want to ask a question.
Okay.
And here's my response first. My response is, and it's a great show to have this discussion on, because earlier in the show we talked about diagnosis. And here's the example I'll give you. Someone can drink alcohol. They can drink a whole bottle of vodka every night, and they can get drunk. However, they can be completely functional at home and or at work. And their family isn't necessarily recognizing that as a problem. And at work, they get up, they go to work, they do their job, they come home, they're moving up, nothing is changing. So in that case, this individual would not be diagnosed with alcohol abuse. They just would not receive that diagnosis. If they had before, they would be classified as recovered from that diagnosis, because they do not meet the criteria that make them dysfunctional. That's what I was trying to get to earlier when we were talking about this. So a disorder is by definition something that causes disorder. It causes an inability to function in one of our two environments, whether it's home and work or home and school. And if a person has a series of symptoms and they do not meet the needs of the disorder, the criteria of the disorder, they don't have the disorder. It's very simple. So in autism, you must have the specific number of symptoms in each area, which is social communication and in repetitive stereotypical behaviors. You could potentially have a serious problem still with social communication. Many people do. But then that would be called social communication disorder. It would no longer classify as autism. Right. You could, for instance, have self-stimulatory types of behaviors, but no social communication delay. In that case, in most cases, that's anxiety. So it's kind of like you have to have these symptoms to have the disorder. So anyone actually who doesn't have all of the symptoms, it could be classified as recovered. Now what happens with our kids...
If they had it at one time.
If they had it, exactly. So with our kids, well, they start out obviously having all of the symptoms. Over the course of time, we teach them a lot of speech, we teach them a lot of language. They very quickly, that leads to additional social behavior. We develop their social skills. As you know, we work heavily on that. A lot of times we find out the underlying cause for their repetitive behaviors. We eliminate those. And over the course of 4 years, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, as you know, some of our kids are involved with us for a long time. All of those things are gone. They're gone. And now this is an individual who is in normal school without help, and they are functioning great. They have friends. We have many, many, many children like this.
Yes.
They have friends. No one could see this individual and say, oh, there's something really strange at all. Right. In fact, a lot of our children have gone and seen a new psychiatrist, a new psychologist, and the diagnosis has been completely removed because they do not fit the criteria for the diagnosis. And they're functioning great. They're in first, second, third, whatever. I mean, my kids, as I said, my recovered adults are in college. So from my perspective, they have recovered. Now, English is my second language, and it wasn't until many, many years later that someone told me, oh, there's something in the word recovered that gives people the impression that they're coming out of something bad. I don't know. I still don't know that that's true. I still don't really see that. I feel like whatever was, the way that I look at it is you are recovered from having hearing issues when you put in a hearing aid. You are recovered from having visual issues when you wear glasses. Recovery is recovery. It's like, you have overcome a series of things, whether they were medical or environmental or whatever they were, that they don't affect you in any way anymore. So that's why I use the term. There is clearly in my mind, there's no negative associated with the term. In fact, it's positive, because individuals who are diagnosed with autism and then recover, trust me, they go through a lot of work. It's not something that happens overnight. That's why I don't use the word cure, because I feel like they still have whatever it was that caused them, but they learned how to overcome it, and it wasn't an instant cure. It was a period of work, intense, heavy work, that they've accomplished, and they are now functioning like the rest of the world. So to me, that's really important, and I see it as a very positive term. So now the question I would like to pose is, they wrote, what was the last sentence? No one ever, or it's not true, it's false? Did they say something like recovering from autism is false?
But to completely recover, what it's written here is, but to completely recovery is false.
I would ask you why. Why do you believe that it is false? Well, I really want to know that, because a lot of times people say that and we assume different things. I know that some people assume no one can ever overcome all the symptoms. I would disagree with that.
Yeah.
I have individuals who are adults where you could never tell they had any issue at all ever in their lives. Yeah. And they did, and they were pretty severely affected by it. Some of those individuals are on my recovered video, you know.
Yes.
And on the other hand, sometimes people find a negative connotation with the word recovery, which that I understand completely. But to say that someone never completely recovers is false, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I would love to ask for elaboration on that.
Okay, and we'll look forward to that. I've been in many discussions about this. We were just talking the other day. I had a friend come with me to the Autism Speaks walk a couple of years ago, and she was helping to work at our booth. And over the years, the way we have languaged autism in our house has changed. Like every couple of years, it changes. When my son was first diagnosed, and I would say to people, "Oh, my son is autistic," and then I hated the way that sounded. That just didn't feel right to me. It just bugged me. And then I watched Holly Robinson Peete on Oprah, and I heard her say, "Well, I don't say he's autistic. I say he has autism," because, you know, and that felt better to me. So I started saying my son has autism. And I know a lot of people don't like that.
Right.
It's like there's two factions, autistic or has autism, and both sides get completely rankles. And I welcome everyone to use the words that they want to use.
They feel comfortable with.
Right. And then when we started at CARD, I felt like it was really important for us to make positive assumptive words. So I used to say to people all the time, my son Jem is actively recovering from autism.
Yeah.
Because every day that's what we were doing. He was actively recovering from autism. And then we got to a point where enough people said to me, that's offensive to me, adults who are on the spectrum. They said, it makes me feel like you think that I'm leprosy. And I was like, oh, I don't feel that way at all. And if that really hurts your feelings, I won't say that. Jem says now to people, he says, I had autism when I was a child. Yeah. That's what Jem says.
I love that.
And I want, since it should be individual driven, and not one size fits all, you know, that's, and other than the show, I have, you know, he has given me permission on the show to talk about that, but other than the show, if I'm outside this building, I am not allowed to talk about his autism. He talks for himself, because that's as it should be. He's 13 and a half, and he worked really hard to have the privilege of being able to communicate that for himself. So our words keep changing with time. And I know parents that through the medical system have gotten to the point where their child no longer qualifies for services because they no longer qualify for an autism spectrum disorder. And what the doctors stamped it was autism in remission. We're always dancing around the R words, which I find really interesting. And when I've told friends...
remission also I have a bigger problem with, because remission implies that there's a chance that it could come back.
And that is why they're calling it that, because they think that it might. They think that it might, or that you might need services down the road. And so that's why. I have friends who are on the spectrum who are like, remission is all, but you're making it sound like a disease. And I do think that that's part of the emotional thing of it, is that the connotation is that we're saying that it's something bad. But for me, how can we exist on a space where we say it's a disorder, right? But it's not bad,
right?
Like, how can these two things exist? And what I've started saying is, for myself, is the disabling aspects of autism, that my son has, I believe, almost completely recovered from not from autism, but from the disabling aspects of autism. He still has all the things that his brain does differently because of autism. He still has that, but there aren't things that are gumming it up.
Absolutely.
So
I think
yeah.
it's just really important for us to be very clear that there's no negative connotation when we
None.
say recovered.
And there's no negative connotation when we're talking about
overcoming it.
People who have those symptoms either.
Oh,
but if it's
absolutely.
preventing them from being able to do
That's right.
something, then let's help them. I think that's the focus
exactly
always.
if they would like the help. I mean,
Yes.
I often tell parents also, it's completely up to you. Because, you know, as a child, the parent is the one making the decisions, obviously. And I often tell parents, it is your decision which direction your child will go. But
That's
if
true.
you commit to this, then this is a pretty intensive program for the next 3 to 4 years, at
Yes.
least.
Yeah.
And it's really a lot of work. Don't get involved with this unless you're willing to commit to this, because it could become a negative experience if you do it kind of halfway.
Yes.